The SAPC Code of Ethics follows international best practice in terms of this principle, professional and scientific responsibility to society, but there's an additional emphasis in our ethics code around human rights, and that's really to take into account our difficult history under apartheid, where there was often sort of a collusion of psychology with apartheid practices and racial segregation and denigration of other kinds of knowledge systems. So the SAPC Code of Ethics brings in human rights as a particular focus. The understanding in this part of the code is really that we can't separate our individual practice in the consulting room from the broader social unconscious. So if we think about the idea of analytic practice, what makes it different from other kinds of therapies is the emphasis and the understanding of the unconscious. We would then also think about the idea of a social unconscious, which means that the individual psyche is affected by what's happening socially in the unconscious, but also analytic practice should then reflect understandings and engagement with the social unconscious as well. So Leila Patel in 1992 wrote that under apartheid social services were shaped by colonialism and apartheid, and as such were not only racially stratified to provide unequal benefits to whites, but were also informed by colonialist discourses of the day through which indigenous knowledge systems were marginalized. In 1998, Vassana wrote a paper on the history of codes of ethics in psychology in South Africa, and he also picked up some of the criticism of ethical codes during apartheid, in that they were faulted for colluding with apartheid practices by being insufficiently critical of apartheid policy. So here we really see two aspects. The one is that of a history of collusion with apartheid practices, but then also a history of not being sufficiently critical. So the idea of silence is also a way of colluding. So the value statement in this section speaks to the fact that in psychoanalytic thought there's an emphasis on the internal world as well as the external world. So the internal world, the client's individual internal world impacts on external realities, and that in psychoanalytic practice the therapist endeavors to help the client to make emotional contact internally with an oft painful reality. So it's about making sense of the internal world and the way in which that's impacting externally, and also the way in which the external world is then impacting on the way identity is shaped, the way that experiences are experienced or made sense of. And that, of course, then speaks to social practices or the social unconscious as well. So the code recognizes the interconnection between internal and external. And this recognition of this interconnection is therefore highlighted as an ethical responsibility towards society. So along with this recognition is also the responsibility for the practitioner to then move mentally and perhaps even physically between the consulting room and the external social realities, and not to remain isolated in just an internal interpsychic idea of practice and of theory, but to connect that with the broader social realities. So the four ethical principles of the Bill, of the Code, are in line with the Bill of Rights in the South African Constitution, and so the statement serves to affiliate the Code of Ethics with universal human rights as enshrined in our Constitution. And some of these rights in the Constitution are the right to equality, to dignity, to freedom of expression, citizenship, housing, healthcare, food, water and social security, education, language and culture, to name but a few in the Bill of Rights. Under apartheid, the majority of South Africans were excluded from exercising these rights, and the racist ideology that supported this exclusion, as well as the social, economic and psychic consequences of it, did significant damage to our social fabric in South Africa, but also to each one of us individually, to our individual psyches. So all of us were affected by these exclusionary practices under apartheid, privileged whites as well as disenfranchised black people. So Principle 4 recognises the diversity of South African society and the multiplicity of South African identities. South Africa's status as the most unequal society in the world is also recognised in this value statement, and particularly the impact of this on the mental health of the nation, as well as access to mental health care services. So 20 years post-democracy, we're still struggling with broader issues of poverty in our society, and we know that poverty is one of the major factors that impacts on the mental health of people. And along with poverty, it means that a lot of our population struggle to access mental health care services. So Principle 4 is recognising this, and in recognising that is also talking to the fact that it's our ethical responsibility to try to make those services more accessible to the majority of the South African population. So the principle is promoting active engagement in order to remove barriers to access rigorous psychoanalytic treatment for all South Africans, irrespective of language, class or financial standing.